They called me replaceable. Those words cut deeper than any knife could, shattering the loyalty I had built over years of service. The next morning, when I sat in my supervisor's chair, everything changed. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. My name is Jessica Martin, and I never thought I'd be writing about my own revenge story. 3 years ago, I started at the Boston headquarters as just another administrative assistant with big dreams and even bigger determination. I worked tirelessly, staying late when others left, volunteering for the projects nobody wanted, and meticulously tracking every detail that might slip through the cracks. My efforts eventually earned me a promotion to project coordinator, though the journey was far from easy. Before that fateful day when everything changed, my professional life followed a predictable rhythm. The office building downtown became my second home, its sleek corridors and fluorescent lighting as familiar as my own apartment. Each morning, I'd arrive 30 minutes early, coffee in hand, ready to tackle whatever challenges awaited. I genuinely believed that dedication would be recognized, that merit mattered more than office politics. Daniel Thompson, my supervisor, maintained a calculated distance from everyone on the team. He was the type of manager who hoarded information like currency, dispensing it only when absolutely necessary. Daniel seemed more interested in protecting his position than developing the talent beneath him. I noticed how his eyes would narrow slightly whenever someone received praise from upper management, as if mentally taking notes on potential threats to his authority. I wasn't completely alone in the corporate wilderness, though. Marissa Clark started the same month I did, and we quickly formed an alliance. Marissa had a quick wit and infectious laugh that made even the most tedious days bearable. We'd share hurried lunches in the break room, trading stories about impossible deadlines and Daniel's latest micromanagement tactics. Sometimes we'd stay late together, ordering takeout and commiserating over project hiccups while the office emptied around us. Those early days held a sense of camaraderie I now look back on with bittersweet nostalgia. Marissa and I had an unspoken agreement to watch each other's backs, to share credit and shoulder blame equally. We celebrated each other's small victories and provided shoulders to cry on after particularly brutal feedback sessions. I foolishly believed that workplace loyalty was sacred, that the bonds formed in professional trenches would withstand any pressure. How naive I was back then, thinking that hard work alone would carve my path forward. I hadn't yet learned that in corporate America, perception often outweighs performance, and that some people will sacrifice any relationship for advancement. I still believed in fairness, in recognition based on merit rather than politics. That belief system was about to be shattered completely, leaving me with a choice: break down or fight back. My name is Jessica Martin, and I never expected that a single sentence uttered in a bland corporate office could change the entire trajectory of my life. I had always prided myself on being reliable, hardworking, and above all, indispensable to my team at our Boston headquarters. But the day my supervisor looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're replaceable," something inside was shattered and at the same time ignited. I walked out of that fluorescent-lit office with my pride torn to pieces and my chest feeling painfully hollow. The sting of humiliation mixed with a simmering rage I couldn't quite name. All I knew was that I wanted nothing more than to prove him wrong, not just to reclaim my dignity, but to show everyone, including myself, that I was anything but replaceable. Outside of work, I leaned heavily on my best friend Julia Parker. We met in college and had weathered every storm together, from bad breakups to cross-country moves. Julia always told me I was destined for more, that I shouldn't let anyone, especially not some insecure boss, diminish my worth. My world felt small, but safe, held together by routines. Morning coffee, crowded commutes, and the steady click of my heels on marble hallways. I was committed to making a name for myself, on my own terms, believing that hard work would eventually outshine office politics. That illusion began to crack when our department faced mounting pressure from the executive team. Deadlines grew impossibly tight, and Daniel's leadership became increasingly erratic. He'd call emergency meetings just to assert his authority, then cancel them without explanation. I watched him transform from a distant manager into something closer to a dictator. "He's losing it," Marissa whispered to me one afternoon, as we huddled by the coffee machine. Did you see how he tore into Greg from accounting? The poor guy was just asking for clarification. I nodded, feeling that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. Daniel had started micromanaging everything, demanding hourly updates, barking orders across the room, and snapping at anyone who dared question his methods. The office atmosphere thickened with tension and resentment. People stopped laughing. Conversations died whenever he walked past. I tried to shield myself by focusing solely on results. If my work was impeccable, I reasoned, I'd be immune to his mood swings. I stayed late, double-checked every report, and anticipated problems before they arose. I was determined to be the one person he couldn't find fault with. Marissa and I occasionally whispered about finding new jobs during our lunch breaks. We'd scroll through listings on her phone, dreaming of escape. "This one looks perfect for you," she'd say, pointing to some marketing coordinator position across town. But neither of us made a move. We were too invested in our careers at the company, too hopeful that things would eventually turn around. The Boston job market was competitive, and starting over somewhere new felt terrifying. "I've put in 3 years here," I told Julia over drinks one Friday night. "I can't just throw that away because my boss is having a midlife crisis." I still believed, deep down, that if I played by the rules and kept my head down, I'd be rewarded. That hope kept me going, right up until Daniel's words cut me down and changed everything. That illusion began to crack as our department faced mounting pressure. Deadlines grew tighter, and Daniel's leadership grew more erratic. I noticed the change gradually at first, the way he'd snap at small mistakes, or how his eyes would narrow when someone questioned his decisions. Soon, he was micromanaging everything, barking orders across the office floor like we were children instead of professionals. The tension in our Boston headquarters became palpable. Even the bright fluorescent lights seemed harsher somehow, highlighting the strain on everyone's faces. I'd walk through those marble hallways feeling my shoulders tighten with each step, dreading what new impossible demand might be waiting at my desk. "He's just stressed about the quarterly numbers," Marissa would say, always making excuses for him. But I could see the same anxiety in her eyes that I felt in my chest. The camaraderie that once defined our team was evaporating, replaced by a survival mentality where everyone looked out for themselves. I tried to adapt by working even harder. I'd stay late, reviewing reports until my vision blurred, triple-checking presentations before client meetings. My social life outside the office dwindled to occasional calls with Julia, who kept warning me that I was burning myself out. "They don't deserve this much of you, Jess," she'd say, but I brushed off her concerns. During team meetings, I watched as my colleagues grew quieter, less willing to contribute ideas or take risks. Daniel Thompson had created an atmosphere where mistakes weren't learning opportunities, they were ammunition he could use against you later. Still, I clung to my belief that excellence would shield me from his unpredictable temper. Marissa and I started having hushed conversations by the coffee machine, debating whether we should update our resumes. "I've got 3 years invested here," I'd whisper. "It has to get better." She'd nod in agreement, but I noticed how her eyes would drift toward Daniel's office, calculating her own odds of survival. I was too invested to walk away, not just financially, but emotionally. This job had become part of my identity. I'd sacrificed weekends, relationships, and peace of mind for it. The thought of starting over somewhere else terrified me more than facing Daniel's criticism. So I kept playing by the rules, convinced that if I just worked hard enough, smart enough, long enough, someone would notice. I believed that merit still mattered more than politics. That hope kept me going, right up until Daniel's words cut me down. The confrontation came late one gray afternoon. I had just finished presenting a critical client report, only to have Daniel dismiss my work with a smirk and that now infamous phrase, "You're replaceable, Jessica." His words echoed in my mind long after the meeting ended. I remember walking back to my desk in a daze, my colleagues' eyes following me with a mixture of pity and discomfort that made my skin crawl. I spent the rest of that workday on autopilot, typing emails I wouldn't remember sending and nodding through conversations that never registered. The fluorescent lights of our Boston office seemed suddenly harsher, highlighting every crack in my professional facade. When 5 o'clock finally came, I gathered my things with trembling hands and fled before anyone could offer hollow sympathies. The subway ride home was a blur of faces and noise. I kept replaying Daniel Thompson's words, each repetition like a knife twisting deeper. 3 years of dedication, all the late nights, the missed birthday parties, the canceled dates, all dismissed in a single cruel sentence. My throat tightened as I realized how much of myself I had sacrificed for a company that saw me as interchangeable. I barely made it through my apartment door before the tears came. I collapsed onto my couch, still in my work clothes, and let the humiliation wash over me. My phone buzzed repeatedly, probably Marissa checking in, but I couldn't bear to speak to anyone from the office. Instead, I called Julia, my voice breaking as soon as she answered. "He said I'm replaceable, Jules," I sobbed, curling into myself. "After everything I've done, like I'm nothing." Julia listened as I poured out every detail of the humiliation. How Daniel had looked at me with such dismissive confidence. How the room had fallen silent. How Marissa had averted her eyes rather than defend me. "I feel so stupid," I whispered. "So small and worthless." There was a moment of silence before Julia spoke, her voice firm but gentle. "Listen to me, Jess. Daniel doesn't get to decide your worth. No one does but you. If you walk away now, he wins. You need to prove to yourself that you're irreplaceable." I wiped my eyes, her words penetrating the fog of self-pity. "How am I supposed to do that when he's already made up his mind?" "By being so damn good at what you do that he can't ignore it," she said. "Or by finding a way to show him exactly what he's missing when you're gone." Something shifted inside me as I absorbed her words. The hurt was still there, raw and throbbing, but beneath it I felt a spark of something else, determination maybe, or the first flicker of righteous anger. I took a deep breath, steadier than before. "You're right," I said finally. "I'm not going to let him win." That night, I replayed the scene over and over, each time feeling angrier and more betrayed. I had given so much to that job, sacrificed weekends, missed out on family events, all for the sake of a boss who saw me as nothing more than a cog in his machine. I called Julia, sobbing into the phone, confessing how small and stupid I felt. She listened quietly, then told me what I needed to hear. "Don't let him decide your worth, Jess. If you walk away now, he wins. Prove to yourself that you're irreplaceable." Her words planted the first seeds of resolve. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel Thompson's smug face as he delivered those cutting words. The digital clock on my nightstand showed 3 a.m. when I finally admitted to myself that I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. This man had casually dismissed 3 years of dedication with a single sentence. 3 years of early mornings, late nights, and sacrificed personal time. Julia was right. If I quit, Daniel would just replace me with someone else to manipulate and belittle. The thought of him doing this to another person made my stomach turn. I sat up in bed, switched on my lamp, and grabbed a notebook. With shaking hands, I started writing down every instance I could remember where Daniel had taken credit for others' work, made questionable decisions, or thrown someone under the bus. By sunrise, I had 4 pages filled. I felt different, not better exactly, but more focused. The tears had dried, replaced by a cold determination I'd never experienced before. I showered, picked out my most professional outfit, a navy blue suit I usually saved for client meetings, and applied my makeup with unusual precision. "You want replaceable?" I whispered to my reflection. "I'll show you irreplaceable." On the commute to our Boston headquarters, I formulated my plan. I would create a paper trail of everything. Every email would be saved, every conversation documented, every project change tracked with timestamps. I wouldn't give Daniel any ammunition against me. Instead, I would quietly build my case, day by day. Walking into that fluorescent-lit office felt different now. I noticed things I'd overlooked before. How people averted their eyes when Daniel walked by. How Marissa seemed to hover near his office more frequently. My former friend barely acknowledged me that morning, offering only a tight smile before turning back to her computer. The distance between us felt suddenly vast and deliberate. I settled at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new password-protected folder. I named it Insurance. Then I got to work. If Daniel Thompson thought I was replaceable, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I started noticing the shift in Marissa's behavior about 2 weeks after Daniel's cutting remark. At first, it was subtle. She'd linger by his office door, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. Then I caught her nodding along as he criticized my latest project proposal. The same proposal she had helped me refine over lunch just days earlier. Our friendship had been one of my anchors at the company. We'd started in the same month, shared the same struggles, celebrated each other's small victories. Now I'd catch her watching me with a calculating look that made my stomach twist. She began echoing Daniel's phrases in meetings, using his exact words to question my methods. It felt like watching someone I trusted transform into a stranger right before my eyes. One Tuesday afternoon, I cornered her in the break room when no one else was around. "What's going on with you and Daniel?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're different lately." Marissa stirred her coffee slowly, not meeting my eyes. "I'm just playing the game, Jess. That's how you get ahead in this place." She finally looked up, and I was shocked by the cool detachment in her expression. "Maybe you should try it instead of being so earnest all the time." "So throwing me under the bus is just part of the game?" I asked, hurt burning in my chest. She shrugged, gathering her things. "It's not personal. It's business." With that, she walked out, leaving me standing alone with my cooling cup of tea and the bitter taste of betrayal. That night, I called Julia and confessed how much Marissa's defection had wounded me. "I never thought she'd choose ambition over our friendship," I said, my voice cracking. "Some people show their true colors when there's something to gain," Julia replied gently. "This isn't about you being replaceable, Jess. It's about her being replaceable as a friend." The next morning, I looked around the office with new eyes. The space that had once felt like a second home now seemed hostile territory. Daniel watched me from his glass-walled office. Marissa hovered at his side like an eager shadow, and other colleagues averted their eyes when I passed. The isolation was suffocating. I realized then that I was truly on my own in this fight. No allies in the department, no friends to watch my back. Just me against a system designed to make people like me doubt themselves. But something hardened inside me that day, a determination that burned hotter than my hurt. If I had to navigate this battlefield alone, then so be it. I would become my own strongest advocate. As the weeks passed, I noticed Marissa spending more time in Daniel's office, laughing at his jokes, echoing his criticisms of my work. Our once solid friendship began to crumble, replaced by a cold professionalism that felt more like rivalry. Every time I walked by and saw them huddled together, my stomach would knot up. 3 years of shared lunches and late-night work sessions seemed to evaporate overnight. I tried to confront her about it one afternoon in the break room. "Is everything okay between us?" I asked, keeping my voice low as I stirred my coffee. Marissa barely looked up from her phone, brushing me off with a casual, "Of course, I'm just busy," before mentioning she was playing the game, and suggesting I should do the same. The dismissal stung worse than any direct insult could have. It hurt more than I'd admit. Losing a friend to ambition was a pain I hadn't anticipated. I'd trusted her with my frustrations, my hopes for advancement, even my strategies for handling difficult clients. Now I wondered how much of that information had made its way to Daniel's eager ears. Suddenly, the Boston office felt even more hostile, and I realized I was truly on my own. Isolation only deepened when my supervisor started excluding me from key meetings. I'd arrive at work to find the conference room door closed, voices murmuring inside about projects I should have been part of. Daniel assigned my responsibilities to others, often without explanation, and I caught whispers about my supposed lack of initiative spreading through the department like poison. I'd catch glimpses of colleagues averting their eyes in the hallway, their faith in me visibly eroding. The cold shoulders and sympathetic glances told me everything I needed to know about my standing. Every morning, I'd steel myself before walking through those glass doors, reminding myself that I wouldn't let them break me. But I refused to fold. Instead, I doubled down on my work, staying late to fix problems that Daniel conveniently ignored. I became even more meticulous, documenting everything in case I needed to defend my contributions later. The fluorescent lights would burn long after everyone else had gone home, my determination growing with each passing hour. During this time, I found an unexpected ally in Michael Evans, the new intern who seemed just as out of place as I felt. He was eager, smart, and willing to listen when no one else would. I began quietly mentoring him, showing him the ropes and warning him about the office politics without explicitly badmouthing anyone. "You're the only one who actually explains things," Michael told me one evening as we worked late. "Everyone else just expects me to know." His words were a small comfort in the increasingly chilly atmosphere of a workplace I once considered my second home. My isolation only deepened when Daniel started excluding me from key meetings. I'd arrive at the office to find discussions already in progress, doors closed, and decisions made without my input. He assigned my projects to others, often without explanation, and spread subtle rumors about my lack of initiative. I caught glimpses of colleagues whispering behind my back, their faith in me eroding with each passing day. The worst part wasn't the professional isolation. It was watching relationships I'd cultivated for years dissolve before my eyes. People I once shared lunch with suddenly had other commitments. Conversations would halt when I approached the break room. Even simple greetings in the hallway became awkward, strained exchanges, but I refused to fold. Something inside me, maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, wouldn't let Daniel win so easily. I doubled down on my work, staying late to fix problems he ignored, meticulously documenting every contribution I made. I became a shadow presence, quietly ensuring projects succeeded despite his sabotage. During this time, I found an unexpected ally in Michael Evans, the new intern who seemed just as out of place as I felt. While others avoided me, Michael asked questions, sought my advice, and actually listened. He was eager, smart, and refreshingly genuine in an office increasingly filled with politics and pretense. "They're all afraid," Michael whispered one afternoon, as we watched Marissa laughing too loudly at Daniel's joke across the room. "They see what's happening to you and don't want to be next." His observation hit me like a punch to the gut, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Daniel wasn't just targeting me. He was making an example of me. Every slight, every exclusion was a message to the others: cross me, and this will be you. I began mentoring Michael quietly, showing him the ropes while simultaneously teaching him how to protect himself in this toxic environment. Our hushed conversations became a lifeline, reminding me that I still had value, still had knowledge worth sharing, still mattered. At night, I'd return to my apartment exhausted but determined. I started a journal documenting every incident, every slight, every project success that Daniel claimed as his own. I wasn't sure what I'd do with this information, but collecting it gave me purpose. If nothing else, I would have proof that I wasn't crazy, that what was happening was real. What I didn't realize then was that these small acts of resistance were slowly rebuilding my strength. With each day I survived, with each challenge I overcame, I was becoming someone Daniel couldn't break, someone truly irreplaceable. One rainy November evening, I overheard Daniel mocking me at a company dinner, telling upper management that I was barely competent and easily replaced. The humiliation stung all over again, but this time, something inside me hardened. I realized he was afraid of being exposed, afraid of losing control. That was when I decided to fight back, not just for myself, but for the others he'd belittled and bullied. I wasn't going to let him define my story. I would use every ounce of resilience and every scrap of evidence I'd gathered to turn the tables. Around that time, Claudia Harris, the HR manager, began giving me assignments that were technically above my pay grade. She approached me after a particularly tense department meeting where Daniel had dismissed my input in front of everyone. Her eyes held something I couldn't quite read as she asked me to stay behind. "Jessica, I need someone to prepare a detailed analysis of our client retention strategies," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "I think you're the right person for this." My stomach knotted instantly. Was this another trap? Another opportunity for Daniel to prove I couldn't handle responsibility? I studied Claudia's face, searching for signs of collusion with my supervisor, but found none. "This should be Daniel's responsibility," I said carefully, testing the waters. Claudia just nodded. "I'm aware of that, but I'm asking you." Over the next few weeks, the assignments kept coming. Departmental budget reviews, staffing assessments, strategy proposals. Each task was more complex than the last, requiring deeper insight into company operations. I worked late into the night, triple-checking every figure, anticipating Daniel's criticism. But the criticism never came. Instead, Claudia kept our interactions private, away from Daniel's prying eyes. She asked thoughtful questions about my recommendations, implemented several of my suggestions, and seemed genuinely interested in my perspective. Why me? I finally asked her one evening as we reviewed quarterly projections. Because I see what others don't, she replied simply. Gradually, I understood what was happening. Claudia wasn't setting me up, she was testing me, quietly assessing whether I could handle leadership responsibilities. Perhaps she had seen through Daniel's facade long before I had gathered my evidence. I threw myself into these assignments with renewed purpose. Each report became more than just a task. It was proof of my capabilities, evidence that I was anything but replaceable. I started including innovative solutions to long-standing problems, demonstrating not just competence, but vision. My confidence grew with each completed project. For the first time in months, I felt valued, even if only by one person in the company. I was determined not to let Claudia down, or myself. Whatever game was being played in the upper echelons of management, I was finally becoming a player rather than a pawn. Around that time, Claudia Harris, the HR manager, began giving me assignments that were technically above my pay grade. She asked for detailed reports, analysis, and even input on departmental strategy, tasks that should have been Daniel's responsibility. At first, I was wary, suspecting a setup. I'd been burned enough times to know that in corporate America, kindness often came with strings attached. But Claudia's demeanor was different from Daniel's. Where he demanded, she requested. Where he criticized, she offered constructive feedback. Still, I approached each task with caution, triple-checking my work before submitting anything. As the weeks passed, I noticed a pattern. Claudia continued to trust me with increasingly sensitive projects, quietly assessing whether I could handle more responsibility. She never mentioned Daniel directly, but the implication was clear. She was seeing gaps in his leadership that I was filling. I started receiving emails marked confidential, containing budget forecasts and team performance metrics that typically only supervisors had access to. Your attention to detail is impressive, Claudia told me one afternoon after I'd completed a particularly complex analysis. Her eyes held something I hadn't seen directed at me in months: respect. That small moment of validation felt like oxygen after months of suffocation. I poured myself into these assignments, staying late at the office when necessary, determined not to let this opportunity slip through my fingers. Each project became both a test and a shield, proof of my capabilities that no one, especially not Daniel, could dismiss. I was building a portfolio of work that spoke for itself, one spreadsheet and presentation at a time. What Claudia didn't know was that I was keeping meticulous records of everything: copies of my work, her feedback, dates and times of our meetings. After Daniel's betrayal, I'd learned the hard way that in this environment, documentation wasn't paranoia, it was protection. Some nights, I'd call Julia to talk through my strategy. "You're playing chess while they're playing checkers," she'd say, her confidence in me unwavering even when mine faltered. Those conversations kept me grounded when the stress threatened to overwhelm me. I knew I was walking a dangerous line. If Daniel discovered what was happening, his retaliation would be swift and merciless. But with each successful project, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about saving my job anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and exposing the truth. For the first time since that humiliating confrontation, I felt something close to hope. I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing. And preparation, as my father always said, was the foundation of opportunity. Meanwhile, Michael confided in me about mistakes Daniel had been covering up, shifting blame onto junior staff to protect himself. It was a risky admission, but it confirmed what I had long suspected. Together, we started keeping a careful record of these incidents, building a silent arsenal of proof. I remember the day Michael approached me, nervously glancing around the break room to make sure no one was listening. His voice barely above a whisper, he told me how Daniel had deliberately misreported budget numbers to the executive team. then blamed a new hire when discrepancies were discovered. My stomach knotted as Michael described similar patterns stretching back months, all pointing to a calculated effort to maintain Daniel's pristine reputation at everyone else's expense. I thought I was going crazy, Michael admitted, his eyes downcast. Everyone acts like it's normal, but it's not right. The relief in his voice was palpable, like he'd been carrying this burden alone for too long. I felt a strange mix of validation and dread. Here was proof I wasn't imagining things, but it also confirmed that my supervisor was more calculating than I'd realized. I cautiously shared some of my own observations, watching Michael's eyes widen as the puzzle pieces fit together. "We need to document everything," I whispered, sliding my coffee mug between my palms. Dates, times, exact words, anything that can't be denied later. From that day forward, Michael and I developed a system. We'd exchange seemingly innocent sticky notes with coded references or send each other meeting invites with hidden information in the notes field. We backed up emails where Daniel contradicted himself or threw team members under the bus. I created a password-protected document on my personal laptop, meticulously recording every incident. What started as self-preservation gradually evolved into something more purposeful. This wasn't just about protecting ourselves anymore. It was about exposing a pattern of toxic leadership that was hurting everyone on the team. I felt like a detective piecing together a case, each new entry strengthening our position. I knew I was playing a dangerous game. If Daniel discovered what we were doing, he wouldn't hesitate to fire us both. Every time he looked my way, I wondered if he could somehow sense my defiance. My heart would race whenever he called me into his office or stood too close to my computer screen. But the more I uncovered, the stronger my conviction grew. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Someone needed to stand up to him, and I realized that person might have to be me. For the first time in months, I felt something beyond anger and humiliation. I felt purpose. Everything came to a head when Marissa sabotaged my presentation for a major client. She altered my slides at the last minute, making critical data appear inaccurate. I only discovered the changes mid-presentation, as the client's questions grew increasingly pointed and skeptical. I felt my confidence crumble in real time. My hands shook and my voice wavered as I tried to make sense of numbers that suddenly didn't add up. The conference room felt like it was closing in on me. The clients exchanged glances, those unmistakable looks of diminishing trust. In the corner, I caught Daniel's smirk, barely concealed behind his coffee mug. "These projections don't match what you sent us last week," the client's CFO pointed out, his Boston accent thickening with irritation. I scrambled to explain, flipping through my notes, but the damage was already done. The room had turned cold. When I glanced at Marissa, she quickly averted her eyes, but not before I caught a flash of something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. After the disaster, I retreated to the bathroom, locking myself in a stall as tears burned down my cheeks. The marble countertop became my support as I tried to breathe through waves of humiliation. 3 years of dedication reduced to this moment, being perceived as incompetent and unprepared. I heard the bathroom door open and recognized Claudia's voice asking if I was okay. I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I explain that my former friend had deliberately sabotaged me? It sounded paranoid, desperate, exactly how Daniel wanted me to appear. When I finally emerged, red-eyed and defeated, the office was buzzing with whispers. My colleagues suddenly needed to be elsewhere when I approached. My inbox filled with passive-aggressive emails from Daniel, copying senior management, concerned about my attention to detail and ability to handle pressure. That night, I called Julia, barely able to form sentences through my sobs. "I can't do this anymore," I choked out. "They're all against me. Marissa changed my presentation data. I know she did." "Do you have proof?" Julia asked, her voice steady and grounding. I didn't, and that realization made me feel even more powerless. "I should just quit," I whispered, staring at my reflection in my apartment window, the Boston skyline glittering behind me, like all the opportunities I was about to abandon. "Don't give him the satisfaction, Jess," Julia said firmly. "That's exactly what he wants. If you walk away now, his narrative wins." I closed my eyes, exhausted beyond words. But something in her conviction sparked a tiny flame inside me. Maybe it was pride, maybe desperation. But I made a decision right then. I'd rather go down fighting than hand in my resignation, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I had no idea then that this rock-bottom moment would become the foundation for everything that followed. After the meeting, I broke down in the bathroom, convinced my career was over. Word spread quickly, and Daniel seized the opportunity to cast doubt on my competence. For days, I was relegated to menial tasks, ignored in meetings, and treated like a liability. I spent hours staring at my computer screen, pretending to work while fighting back tears. The office felt like a prison, with every glance and whisper seeming to confirm my failure. Daniel made sure to walk past my desk frequently, his smug expression saying everything his words didn't need to. The worst part was watching Marissa slip into the role I'd worked so hard to build, taking credit for projects I'd started and ideas I'd shared. "Maybe you should consider other opportunities," Daniel suggested one afternoon, his voice dripping with false concern as colleagues pretended not to listen. Not everyone is cut out for the pressure here. The humiliation burned through me like acid, but I forced myself to nod and smile, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. At home, I couldn't eat or sleep. Julia called every night, listening patiently as I cycled between rage and despair. "You can't let him win," she insisted. "If you quit now, you're just proving him right." I knew she was right, but the thought of walking back into that toxic environment made my stomach churn. I considered quitting. The idea of walking away, of never having to see their smug faces again, was tempting. I even drafted a resignation letter, my fingers trembling as I typed. I imagined the relief of being free from Daniel's tyranny, of starting fresh, somewhere my reputation wasn't in tatters. But every time I thought about it, I remembered Julia's voice. Don't give him the satisfaction. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late, the weekends I'd sacrificed, the passion I'd poured into my work. I thought about how Daniel would spin my departure as confirmation of my incompetence. I thought about how he'd continue to treat others the same way he'd treated me. I deleted the resignation letter and opened a new document. This time, I started listing everything I knew about Daniel's mistakes, his manipulations, his failures of leadership. I wasn't ready to give up. I decided I would rather fail fighting than give up without a fight. Something inside me hardened that night, a determination that would eventually become my salvation, though I couldn't see it yet. I felt completely defeated that December morning. Daniel had just finished publicly humiliating me in front of our entire team, blaming me for his own careless mistake on the quarterly report. My cheeks burned with shame as I stared at my keyboard, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Not a single person spoke up to defend me, not even Michael, who knew the truth. The silence in that conference room was deafening. I remember walking to the bathroom on shaky legs, locking myself in a stall, and pressing my forehead against the cold metal door. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to cry, really cry, until my mascara ran in black streaks down my face. I had given everything to this company, missed my cousin's wedding for a deadline, walked through a nasty flu during budget season, canceled dates and dinners and vacations. And for what? To be treated like I was nothing? Back at my desk, I noticed Marissa smirking as she whispered something to another colleague. The betrayal stung all over again. We used to share late-night takeout during crunch time, celebrating small victories together. Now she was just another soldier in Daniel's army, eager to watch me fall. That evening, I dragged myself home to my empty apartment, not even bothering to turn on the lights. I sat in darkness, still wearing my wrinkled blazer, replaying every humiliation I'd endured. The way Daniel had looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're replaceable." The altered presentation slides, the exclusion from meetings, the whispers and sideways glances. I caught my reflection in the darkened window, hair disheveled, eyes swollen, shoulders slumped. I barely recognized myself. This wasn't the confident, ambitious woman who'd walked into that Boston office 3 years ago. Daniel Thompson had methodically stripped away my confidence, my connections, and nearly my career. Something shifted inside me as I stared at that broken reflection. A quiet rage began to build, replacing the hollow ache in my chest. I straightened my shoulders and wiped my eyes. This wasn't just about saving my job anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I grabbed my phone and texted Julia. I'm done being his victim. She replied almost instantly. About damn time. That night, I made myself a promise as I stared at my red-eyed reflection. I would never again allow myself to feel this powerless. Daniel had underestimated me, thinking he could break me. But he'd forgotten something crucial. Sometimes, when you try to extinguish a flame, you only make it burn hotter. I wanted my dignity back, and I wanted him to know exactly how wrong he had been about me. I began carefully sharing my documentation with Claudia Harris, presenting clear, irrefutable evidence of Daniel's incompetence and manipulation. My hands trembled slightly as I slid the folder across her desk, containing months of meticulously organized emails, project notes, and timeline discrepancies. She listened intently, her expression revealing nothing, but her questions grew sharper and more frequent with each meeting. Jessica, have others experienced similar treatment? She asked during our third confidential conversation. I nodded, realizing this was my opening. At that point, I started building quiet alliances with others who had suffered in silence under Daniel's reign. Michael was my first confidant, his eager eyes lighting up when I suggested we compare notes on how projects were being mismanaged. I thought I was the only one noticing, he whispered as we huddled in the corner of the break room, careful to keep our voices down. Soon, I connected with Tara from accounting and Raj from IT, both of whom had their own stories of Daniel's intimidation tactics. I encouraged them to document their experiences, to speak up when they felt comfortable. We're stronger together, I told them, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in months. Together, we became a network, small but determined, sharing information through private chats and quick conversations away from prying eyes. What started as my personal vendetta transformed into something larger, a collective stand against toxic leadership. I found myself becoming the unofficial leader of this quiet resistance, the person others trusted with their stories and frustrations. It felt both terrifying and empowering to be the one they turned to. Claudia never promised anything outright. Her professional demeanor remained intact. But I noticed subtle changes. How she'd nod approvingly when I spoke up in meetings. The way she began CCing me on departmental emails that should have gone to Daniel. She was testing the waters, I realized, assessing whether I could handle more responsibility. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone with someone from the board, her voice low but clear. We need to consider structural changes. I have someone in mind who's already doing half the work without the title. My heart raced as I quietly stepped away, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping, but a flutter of hope took root in my chest. The evidence against Daniel was mounting, and for the first time since he declared me replaceable, I felt something shift in the office dynamics. People began coming to me with questions instead of him. The balance of power was slowly, almost imperceptibly changing, and Daniel had no idea what was coming. In February, Claudia asked me to step in as interim supervisor while Daniel was on leave for personal reasons. I knew it was a test, a chance to prove myself in front of the entire team, and possibly senior management. I was terrified, but I accepted. The first days were a whirlwind of stress and self-doubt. But as I settled into the role, I realized how much I had already learned. The team responded to my leadership, projects ran smoothly, and even the hardest skeptics began to trust me. I'll never forget the morning I walked into Daniel's office, now temporarily mine, and sat in his leather chair. It felt surreal, like I was playing a part in someone else's story. My hands trembled slightly as I arranged my notebooks on his desk, wondering if I could actually pull this off. What I didn't expect was Daniel's reaction to my promotion. While supposedly on leave, he began a shadow campaign against me. Emails mysteriously appeared in board members' inboxes, questioning my qualifications. Rumors circulated about how I'd manipulated my way into the position. I even heard he called several team members at home, fishing for any mistakes I might have made. The most painful betrayal came when Marissa agreed to help him. My former friend started documenting every minor hiccup, every delayed deadline, creating a paper trail she thought would eventually lead to my downfall. I caught her rifling through my files one evening when she thought everyone had left. Is it really worth it? I asked her quietly. The look of shame that flashed across her face told me everything I needed to know. Thankfully, Claudia had anticipated Daniel's tactics. She'd been watching him longer than I realized. When he escalated his attacks, sending a formal complaint to the board alleging I had stolen his position through deception, Claudia was prepared. She calmly presented the board with the complete file we had built: emails, performance records, testimonials from staff, even recordings of his verbal abuse during meetings. I sat in that boardroom, heart pounding, as senior executives reviewed the evidence. The atmosphere shifted palpably as they passed documents between them, their expressions growing increasingly grave. For the first time since this nightmare began, the narrative wasn't Daniel's to control. "This is concerning," said the CEO, removing his glasses. "Very concerning indeed. That evening, I received a call from Claudia. The board is impressed with how you've handled things," she said. "Keep doing what you're doing." I hung up and sat on my couch, tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of genuine hope. The tide had finally turned. Daniel, sensing his grip slipping, tried to undermine me from the shadows. He spread rumors, sent accusatory emails to the board, and even tried to rally Marissa to his side. But Claudia was ready. She had been quietly building a case with all the evidence I had meticulously gathered. I remember the day I discovered one of his emails to the senior leadership team. Michael had forwarded it to me with a simple message: "You need to see this." My hands trembled as I read Daniel's words, claiming I was sabotaging department morale and creating a hostile work environment. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so infuriating. "He's getting desperate," Julia told me that night over the phone. "Desperate people make mistakes." She was right. Daniel's tactics were becoming increasingly transparent, even to those who had once supported him. His once powerful allies began distancing themselves, sensing the shifting tides. Marissa was his last hope. I spotted them huddled in the break room one afternoon, their voices hushed but intense. When she noticed me, her eyes darted away, guilt written across her face. Later that day, she approached my desk, fidgeting with her bracelet. "Daniel wants me to back him up at tomorrow's board meeting," she confessed. "He says if I don't, I can forget about that promotion." I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know yet." That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, rehearsing what I might say if confronted. But when morning came, I discovered Claudia had been 3 steps ahead all along. She had compiled a comprehensive file, every email I'd saved, every project timeline Daniel had sabotaged, testimonies from staff members, including Michael, and even documentation of Daniel's attempts to intimidate Marissa. His tactics backfired spectacularly. The board members reviewed the evidence with grave expressions, occasionally glancing at Daniel with unmistakable disappointment. For the first time, the narrative wasn't his to control. The truth was laid bare in black and white, impossible to dismiss or explain away. I'll never forget the moment when the board chair looked directly at Daniel and said, "These allegations are serious and well documented. We'll need to discuss your future with this company." The color drained from his face as he realized his power plays had finally caught up with him. The tide had turned. As I walked out of that meeting, several colleagues nodded at me with newfound respect. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of hope I hadn't dared to feel before. The battle wasn't over, but for once, I wasn't fighting alone. The final showdown arrived without warning. At an all-staff meeting, Daniel attempted one last public humiliation, accusing me of sabotage and disloyalty. The boardroom fell silent as he stood there, pointing his finger at me, his face flushed with desperation. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, but I refused to shrink under his gaze. This was the moment I had prepared for through all those sleepless nights. Before I could even open my mouth to defend myself, Claudia calmly rose from her seat. The HR manager's expression remained professionally neutral as she placed a thick folder on the polished mahogany table. "Actually," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I think the board should review these materials before we continue this discussion." The room went completely still as she methodically produced the files. Emails, reports, and testimonies that proved Daniel's guilt. One by one, she laid out the evidence I had meticulously gathered over months. The altered project timelines, the misappropriated credit, the documented instances of intimidation. Michael caught my eye from across the table and gave me the slightest nod of solidarity. I watched Daniel's face transform as the reality of his situation dawned on him. The color drained from his cheeks, and for the first time since I'd known him, he seemed genuinely speechless. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to interrupt, but the board chairman raised his hand, silencing him with a single gesture. "Jessica," the chairman said, turning to me with newfound respect in his eyes, "we owe you an apology. This level of misconduct should never have been allowed to continue." I felt a lump form in my throat as he continued. "Your integrity and resilience in the face of this situation has been remarkable." What happened next felt like it was happening in slow motion. The board thanked me for my diligence and professionalism, announcing right then and there that I would be taking Daniel's place permanently. The shock on his face was indescribable, a mixture of disbelief, rage, and the dawning realization that he had orchestrated his own downfall. As Daniel was escorted from the boardroom, I caught Marissa's stunned expression from the corner of my eye. My former friend looked utterly lost, suddenly aware that she had backed the wrong horse. I felt no satisfaction in her discomfort, only a quiet acknowledgement that choices have consequences. The stunned silence of the room was the sweetest vindication I could have imagined. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just about proving Daniel wrong. It was about standing up for every person who had ever been made to feel replaceable, disposable, or unworthy. As the meeting adjourned and congratulations poured in, I thought of Julia and how right she had been. I hadn't given him the satisfaction of breaking me. Instead, I had broken the cycle.